Which brings us to the wonderful Mary Gentile, who will round off this panel by talking about value systems and how we can move towards more global new forms of ethics. So welcome back, Mary.
Thank you, Susan. And it's really an honor to be here. I've been listening to all the presentations and seeing all these connections, which I won't be able to mention all of in 5 minutes. But what I want to do is talk about, as you said, values, and in particular to talk about values-driven leadership development. How do we enable people to act more effectively and more often and more confidently on their values? That's the work I do. I call it giving voice to values. And in the previous presentations, there was a lot of emphasis on narratives and creating new narratives. There was an emphasis on choice. I was particularly interested in Christina's talk about increasing autonomy, competence, and relatedness as a way of enabling people to access vitality. I think all of these things relate to the work that I do. The work that I do is about trying to help people find more ways to be more of who they are, to be able to act on their own values more consistently and more successfully. We talk in this session about measuring what matters. I think one of the things that matters the most is being able to be true to ourselves and true to our own values. But unfortunately, what I often see in the work that I do, and I typically work more with business, but we've started to work across into healthcare and engineering and many other fields. What I find is that often when people are confronted with values conflicts, they think about, if you're going to think about measurement, they're trying to anticipate the impacts of the actions that they might take, and they have some sort of intuitive kind of measurement of the likelihood of their success. And what I think and what I try and share in the work I do is that we often underestimate the number of choices that we actually have. In fact, we see in research that people tend to overestimate from the negative and underestimate from the positive. And of course, that happens for good reason, right? It's evolutionarily effective. You want to make sure you're avoiding the possible negative effects of your actions. And so you may underestimate, you may sort of take the most negative implications as a way of protecting yourself. But what I'm trying to do with the work I do is I talk to people about looking at the same set of facts, the same data, the same input, the same past experiences, and trying to craft a different narrative about what's possible given those same facts. I work primarily in business and business schools, although my own academic background is in the humanities. And I think that studying literature and film has actually helped me to bring a different approach to these issues. I think that I look at the same facts and I'm able to think about a different story about how to bring them all together. And that's what I try and share and teach through Giving Voice to Values. So very briefly, what Giving Voice to Values is a new methodology, a new pedagogy for developing our own ability, confidence, competence in acting on our values more often. And it's been shared literally on all 7 continents at this point. It started out for business schools, but we've gone into businesses and NGOs. We've worked with the UN. We've worked with the U.S. military. We've worked with law, engineering, healthcare, et cetera. And the main idea behind it is to ask a new question when it comes to values conflicts. So typically when we encounter values conflicts or when we're trying to raise people's capacity to deal with them, we give them a scenario and we ask them the question, what's the right thing to do in this situation? That's a good question. It's an important question. What Giving Voice to Values is focusing on is asking the question, once you know what's right, how, or what you believe is right, how can you be successful? How can you be effective? And typically when we try and raise people's ethical awareness and their ethical capacity, we tend to focus primarily on a cognitive approach. We teach them models of ethical reasoning. We give them all the relevant regulations, laws, principles. And then we ask them to look at a particular situation and determine what's right. And then we decide that we're done. I call that the preach and pretend method. We preach to you about what's right and about how to figure out what's right, and then we pretend you can do it. What I'm trying to do is shift from an exclusively cognitive approach to a more experiential approach. We're trying to not just provide rules, but provide tools. The main idea behind it is based on research from psychology, from neurosciences, all of which suggests that through rehearsal and pre-scripting and practice and peer coaching, people can be more likely to be able to act in a certain ways. I saw a lot of echoes in Christina's presentation earlier. And so what we did is we developed a new pedagogical approach. We call it the Giving Voice to Values Thought Experiment. So I came out, my background's working at Harvard Business School. I used to run their case writing program. I'm very familiar with that method. We actually take cases, but we frame them differently. Instead of ending your case with the question, what's right, we end your case scenario with a protagonist who has decided what's right. And the question is, how can they be effective? And then we actually work people through a series of there's a kind of protocol we work them through in order to develop skills and scripts and action plans for being able to more effectively act. This is based on some research that, when we confront values conflicts, we often tend to have this kind of deer in headlight moment, and we sort of freeze, and we sort of, we're doing something else, and then this conflict comes up. And the idea is that we often act emotionally, unconsciously, and we do what we think is possible, and then we rationalize post hoc why it was the right thing to do, or maybe why it was the only thing to do. And so we don't ask people, what would you do? Because it triggers that response. It's not because we're trying to be evil. It's because we're trying to protect ourselves from cognitive dissonance. So instead we're trying to rewire that connection. So instead we ask, what if, this is the thought experiment, what if you were this individual in this scenario who has decided this is right? How could they be effective? And we engage people in working together to create scripts and action plans based on research about how people are more creative, for example, bringing down the stress, allowing them to work in this collaborative way. And the idea is that you're building what I'm calling a moral muscle memory, so that when we encounter these kinds of scenarios in the future, our automatic response, that automatic emotional response, actually is broader and more varied, because we feel that as if we have more arrows in our quiver, we have more options. We feel like more choices are feasible for us. So I know that we're running out of time, so I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more that we could say about this, but I hope that, I always, people say, well, what's the thing you hope people will walk away with? I hope people will walk away with the sense that they actually probably have more choices than they think they do. So thanks.